Welcome to the BBC News at 10 outside headlines with a Bush was sentenced in Whole Crown Court today. He's been sentenced 20 years in jail and behind bars. As film director, all have latest will be live from the court, hear what the judge said and have many reports. Also on tonight's programme, FIFA staff deceived by Infantino over the World Cup plans. Two chief officers that were working for the president have resigned today. Also, Spain claimed nearly all migrants who crossed to have now returned to Monaco as it is suspends. Also on the ban of the Great Manchester Mayor will have it tonight. And much more. We'll be with the local North team. What's in the program tonight? And we're joined by Anne with local North and in the program tonight. Yes, we'll have more. We will hear more as Robert Bush gets 20 years behind bars, and we will have more on car park troubles for finding parents and overage elderly people. BBC London is with Harvey Jackson. Harvey, what's in the program tonight? On the program with DK, welcome to join me in about 35 to 40 minutes, and we'll have more on drought issues across England and more about how to keep your kids entertained during the summer. We'll have a weather with Louise later tonight. Welcome along to the BBC News at 10. I'm Keegan W. Top line, the funeral director that worked in a funeral in Hull for over 45 years, has arrived today that he will be given his sentence. He got 20 years behind bars because after weeks, victims who were in court all week were given statements. Lots of people said his apology does not make any difference. Like I say, he has been given a 20 year sentence. But keep just sending that footage every coming days from his warehouse, for funeral home, and even for police interview. Here's a pop from our editor. Here is Louise Smith. Louise Smith has his 4.5-minute report.
ITV Evening News with Charlene White.
Good evening. A funeral director who gave grieving relatives the wrong ashes and hoarded dead bodies is tonight starting a 20-year jail term for his crimes. A judge said Robert Bush showed dishonesty, deception and heartlessness and behaved in a shocking and disgraceful way towards relatives because he was so preoccupied with making money. When police raided his premises in Hull, they found 35 bodies and half a ton of ashes. Many of the affected families watched him sentenced inside court. Outside, some said they hadn't received justice and called for a better regulation of the industry. An ITV News investigation last night exposed just how hundreds of funeral homes are operating with zero oversight. Tonight, the Prime Minister promised to act. A warning that this report from our correspondent Ben Chapman contains details of Bush's crimes, which you may find upsetting.
They stood clutching the memories of their loved ones, whose deaths were treated with such utter disdain by the funeral director they trusted. Outside court, the families of Robert Bush's victims, like Betty and Alan Griffin, whose daughter he gave ashes that she fears weren't theirs.
No matter how many years, it will be never long enough for us. Deep scars remain due to the terrible violations committed against our loved ones. It is agonising to recall a baby denied a proper cremation and left in a paper bag on the floor for nearly 2 years. Equally heartbreaking are many adults denied a dignified resting place.
Robert Bush, who thought his arrest was unreasonable,
feels vindictive the way this has been done,
was jailed for 20 years.
Strange, isn't it?
When police had raided his premises in Hull, they found bodies decomposing on the floor, which families had been told had been cremated. Fraud on a grotesque scale. Phil's mother, Carol, was kept there for 6 weeks. He told me he still has unanswered questions.
I went there where my father's ashes are, thinking I took my mother there as well and they're back together, and it was a stranger's ashes. It was just somebody else's ashes, and so you can't get closure in that respect.
Bush ran his business for 14 years.
I've never given ashes back that weren't ashes.
The judge said no one who'd used his services can be sure they were given the right ashes, and said his motive was greed.
His behaviour towards their living relatives was characterised by dishonesty, deception and heartlessness. If he could reuse a coffin that someone had already paid for, he would do so. If it was cheaper not to keep the deceased in refrigerated conditions, he would do that too.
But he also said procedures weren't followed in the registering of burials and cremations. The government today pledged to crack down on rogue operators and regulate the funeral sector for the first time.
People, I think, would assume that the highest standards apply to this area, and we've got to make sure that they do apply and that there can't be any repeat of what we've seen.
It is what the families have been calling for. The judge told them the dignity that was denied to their loved ones has been more than made a dignity they've shown in their absence. Ben Chapman, ITV News, Hull.
Well, our reporter Matt Price has been in court all week and joins us now. Matt, it's been an incredibly tough few days for all of the families, hasn't it?
Charlene, a very upsetting week for all of the relatives that have been in court throughout proceedings over the last 5 days. Remember, many of them gave evidence. They read victim impact statements, often fighting back tears as they did so. We heard harrowing details of people who thought they'd received the ashes of loved ones only to discover that their bodies hadn't been cremated at all. Others lost money through complex fraud, as you've mentioned. Now, many families are still struggling. This case has brought the thought of loved ones to the forefront of people's minds. It will take them some time to get over the events of Hessle Road. There's already talk of a public inquiry. One quote stood out during proceedings here in Hull. It was from Valerie Coates, who read an impact statement. She said, "May God forgive you, Mr. Bush, because I can't."
Matt, thanks very much.
That right. Today, you can get these German-made autofocus glasses for just £7.50. This batch was originally destined for export to North America, but due to...
Italy has tonight suspended.
In this case. In this case, in unusual and challenging circumstances. The police are to be commended for their work, in particular those on a list of names that has been provided to me. I'm extremely grateful for the arrangements which have been made to enable large numbers of people with an interest in the case to follow the proceedings at court, but also at a remote venue, and to all those who have helped with that. I draw attention also to the work of victim support, who have had considerable involvement in this case, and who have done their valuable work to a very high standard. As always, the court staff have assisted in many different ways, and I'm grateful to counsel and the legal teams on both sides for all the assistance they have given me. The defendant has pleaded guilty to offences charged in an indictment containing 67 counts. The case concerns his activities whilst running a funeral business called Legacy over 12 or so years. He offended on what the prosecution have rightly called an industrial scale. Mr. Wright, King's counsel for the defendant, concedes that he has caused anguish and pain on a scale beyond comprehension. The consequence, as I shall explain, of what the defendant has done is that unless a body was one of those actually recovered by the police from Legacy in 2024 and thus properly identified, no one who had a cremation with Legacy at any time can actually know for certain whether they received the ashes of their loved one, whether or not the case features in the indictment. A number of people who use Legacy have mentioned this to me in their statements. I do not think that I have ever known offences affect so many people, and so many people so deeply. The defendant pleaded guilty on the 15th of October 2025 to counts 31 to 60, 30 counts of fraud by false representation, contrary to Section 1 of the Fraud Act 2006. Count 61, an offence of fraudulent trading, contrary to Section 993 of the Companies Act 2006. Count 62, a further count of fraud by false representation with 57 victims. And counts 63 to 66, 4 further counts of fraud by false representation. At first, he pleaded not guilty to counts 1 to 30 and count 67. A trial date was set for the 5th of October 2026. However, on the 11th of February 2026, he indicated that he would also plead guilty to those counts, and he did so on the 2nd of April 2026. Counts 1 to 30 charged offences of preventing the lawful and decent burial of a dead body. In this case, it is agreed that burial means the final arrangements made for a deceased person, and so includes a cremation. Count 67 charged an offence of theft, contrary to Section 1 of the Theft Act 1968. He now falls to be sentenced for these offences. No sentence I pass can put right the harm that the defendant has done, particularly where so many deceased persons and bereaved relatives are concerned. The pain that is still being suffered cannot, I am afraid, be remedied by a sentence of imprisonment. They are two different things. I have very much in mind all those who have suffered in a variety of ways as a result of the defendant's crimes. What he has done has had a profound effect on the whole of a close-knit community. The defendant ran a funeral director's business in Hull and Beverley. His work meant that a considerable degree of trust was placed in him by bereaved family members to behave respectfully and responsibly towards their loved ones who had passed away. It might be thought that that could be taken for granted. Unfortunately, we now know that Mr. Bush took any and every opportunity that presented itself in the course of his work, dishonestly to enrich himself at the expense of those who used his services, and at great cost to the dignity of some and the peace of mind of others. In their personal statements, many family members have asked why the defendant behaved in the way that he did. In some ways, it might be more comforting if the answer was a complex one. In fact, I have no doubt that the defendant behaved in such a deceitful way because of financial greed. He must unfortunately have a heartless side to him too, which enabled him to treat the living and the dead in the way that he did. And he was very confident that he would get away with what he was doing. He saw no reason, therefore, to moderate the scale of his offending. How did he get away with it? It's not my task to answer that question, but I have sought at least to explore it because it is of such concern to the families. As far as I can see, there were no checks over many years of the way in which he conducted his business. There was no oversight at all, for example, of the conditions in which the deceased were kept in his premises. A single visit might have been enough to bring
But then your granddad was still trying to convince him to leave after 90 minutes. I mean, it's just me. He kept asking him, just... Are you insane? Or just crazy?
some of what he was doing to a halt, or even the prospect of a single visit might have meant that some of what he was doing never started in the first place. The proper procedures under the Births and Deaths Registration Act 1953 do not, on the information I have been provided with, appear to have been followed. Once the registrar issues a certificate for burial or cremation, when a relative reports a death, one part of it should be returned to the registrar, confirming when and where burial or cremation took place. That part should be completed by the person responsible for the burial or cremation. I was told that the registrar should check for outstanding returns, but that in all cases here, the relevant parts of the forms were never returned to the registrar. When there is a non-return, the registrar should contact the General Register Office. That did not happen in this case. I was told by Hull City Council and the East Riding of Yorkshire Council that in their view it is not clear whether this would have changed the outcome of this case. The defendant was so preoccupied with his own enrichment that he behaved in a shocking and disgraceful way towards the deceased entrusted to his care, and his behaviour towards their living relatives was characterised by dishonesty, deception, and heartlessness. If he could reuse a coffin that someone had already paid for, he would do so. If it was cheaper not to keep the deceased in refrigerated conditions, he would do that too. The premises at Hessel Road.
We'll be speaking, we will have a special report from Max Taylor, and we're going to have to conquer and Horace Louise a bit later. And I'm so sorry. At least 57 people died during an attempt to cross into a tiny Spanish enclave of Quito in North Africa. Around 60,000 migrants are estimated to arrive from Spain, save and now almost all back in Morocco.
Yeah, quite.
I've still got 3 minutes.
That could allow this to happen again.
At some point, every adult in this country will have to deal with a funeral of a loved one, and we cannot let these people, in their most vulnerable moments, end up victims to a funeral director like that one.
Bush's crimes shocked the nation. It's hoped they'll change an industry.
Lindsay Smith, BBC News.
And you can see more on this on BBC iPlayer in Funeral Home Horror. It's available now. Spain's Prime Minister says the mass influx of tens of thousands of migrants from Morocco into the tiny Spanish enclave of Ceuta in North Africa is a violation of its territorial sovereignty.
Officials now say the vast majority of those who arrived since Thursday morning have returned to Morocco, but Italy today suspended EU free movement rules with Spain. Here's Sarah Rainsford.
This was the mass scramble to make it into Ceuta. Tens of thousands of migrants in a sudden rush to cross the border where Europe and Africa meet. And no one was trying to stop them. As they swam from Morocco to a sliver of Spanish territory, a new European crisis loomed. Dozens of people drowned trying to make it. But those who did reach Ceuta were overjoyed.
I want to stay here. I want to stay in Spain. That's it. I'm not going back to Morocco.
It seems the sudden surge was sparked by reports in Morocco about a Spanish court ruling that people thought would allow them to claim asylum. Word spread, but it wasn't true. Arriving in Ceuta today, Pedro Sanchez was booed by those who called his migration policies too soft. He blamed people smugglers for feeding young people false hope about an easy path to Europe.
I define what happened yesterday as an attack, a violation of the territorial integrity of Spain. Ceuta is a Spanish city, and what happened yesterday deserves our strongest rebuke and condemnation.
There are questions, though, about Morocco's role and why so many people were able to cross so easily. A similar crisis 5 years ago, though much smaller, was sparked by a diplomatic dispute between Spain and Morocco. Around Europe, the populist right is using all this to call for tighter borders, more security. Italy is suspending its Schengen deal with Spain for now, bringing back document checks. And even Donald Trump has weighed in, claiming that liberal laws had caused an invasion. In fact, migration to Spain has been falling. This is an anomaly, but it's a big one, and it did make some in Ceuta nervous. The population, that's usually tiny, had suddenly soared. This man said there'd been no trouble, but he called the situation unsustainable. This woman says they're a bit scared to go out. And then the migrants began heading back across the border, because there is no easy way to the Spanish mainland from Ceuta, so no reason to stay. Europe has been rattled, but a crisis that arose so quickly is now fading just as fast. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News.
Senior advisor to Gianni Infantino, the president of World Football's governing body, FIFA, has resigned in protest at plans to sell stakes in tournaments, including the World Cup.
Carlos Cordero called it a bad deal for football. Here, they've made it.
Raymian's unprecedented run has broken a 70
impact the UK closest to the low pressure, for example.
And Raymian's reign could perhaps also last 3/4 of a century. Lisa Mazimba, BBC News.
Time for the weather news now, and Chris is here. Hello.
Hi Clive, and well, today there hasn't been much rain at all across England and Wales, but for Scotland and Northern Ireland we did manage quite a few showers, but lovely ends of the day, the sunset here in Newquay in Cornwall. Now, we have heard just a few moments ago about the heats that we've had so far this month, but this is the dry story, and there are parts of southern England that have had no rain at all in July. Today's rain needs to be added to the figures, but it looks by a large margin England and Wales will have the driest July on record. Those records also go back to 190 years. Now, overnight tonight, showers will continue for Northern Ireland and across Scotland. There could be 1 or 2 just running into Cumbria, Lancashire, maybe into northwest Wales as well. Otherwise, it's dry, with clear spells around. Temperatures about 9 to 12 Celsius, 15 in parts of the southeast. Now, into the weekend, we're sandwiched between a couple of weather systems. Low pressure just running to the north of Scotland there. We've got high pressure to the southwest. And so the closer you are to these weather systems, the more they will impact the UK closest to the low pressure. For example, we've got showers for Scotland and for Northern Ireland. They'll turn particularly heavy through the afternoon across northernmost areas, should ease off in Northern Ireland late in the day. Close to the high pressure across England and Wales, not many showers around at all. You could see 1 or 2 into the northwest, both England and Wales. Otherwise, it's dry. Temperatures reaching a high of 27 again towards southeast England. That will feel warm again in the August sunshine. Now, second half of the weekend, showers are less widespread in Scotland, more limited really to the far north, and there'll be lots more of that sunshine to come through Sunday morning. The afternoon, well, rain threatens Northern Ireland, tends to cloud over for Wales, Western England, but it turns a bit hotter in the southeast. Temperatures could hit 29 degrees Celsius. Next week, there is a chance of seeing some rain. Greatest chance, though, is across northwestern areas. Clive.
All right, thank you, Chris. Chris Fawkes there. That's it. Now, it's time for the news, where you are. Have a peaceful night.
Calm.
Thanks, Clive. I'm Kristen Roth, completely
It's completely alright. And then he shouts you, and you ignore him for 10 minutes, then he gets mad.
Now everyone who's on my question channel, here's the latest with our reporter Rebecca Johnson has his 2-minute report.
60,000 people pour across the border from Morocco into Ceuta, littering the beach with discarded rubber rings. Young and old, families, babies. Mostly coming by sea, dozens have died trying. I saw hell, says Abdul Hakim, who was stopped at the border. We walked 14 kilometres through the mountains, but told ourselves it didn't matter as long as the border was open. We were told to take the road to the sea. I found myself completely submerged. I was choking, and I saw 2 men die right before my eyes. The tiny Spanish territory seems like a safe bet for these migrants after a supposed legal loophole issued by the Spanish Supreme Court said migrants intercepted at sea can't be summarily returned, triggering a run on the border. It seems, says Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, that this interpretation of the sentence of the Supreme Court has spread like wildfire in the last hours among human trafficking networks and produced an avalanche with the characteristics and dimension we've seen here. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it's caused an almighty diplomatic row in Europe. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni temporarily ousting Spain from the Schengen Agreement, which guarantees the free movement of people within Europe's borders. Leaders outside the EU keen to highlight their own immigration policies, protect them from events like these.
People will see those scenes and want something to be done, more to be done. What I have done is firstly keep the current Home Secretary in place, because the plan she has implemented has started to make a difference. Although this is the peak period of the year for crossings, overall the number of crossings is down, the number of removals of people is up, so there is progress, but we both recognise that we need to do more.
If we're not in office, our country will be invaded at levels that made Spain look small time. When you look at what happened to Spain, they don't know what to do. And it's happening again today. They're coming in by the tens of thousands. They're just invading the country.
There are normally only 84,000 people living on Ceuta. This influx taking its toll immediately. People don't want to go out, says this shopkeeper, asking us a lot to deliver to their homes. Given the situation, they're a bit scared. Spain's military has been sent in to reinforce the border, authorities promising to speed up deportations, claiming half of those who come here have already gone back. But the huge tides of people arriving in Ceuta keep coming. Olivia Guthrie, ITV News.
Thanks, babes.
Now, Italy's threatened to suspend the open border Schengen agreement with Spain. That's after thousands of migrants broke across the Moroccan border into the Spanish territory of Ceuta. At least 15 people drowned trying to make it onto EU territory. Spain says it's sending soldiers and extra police to reinforce the border. Now, Ceuta on Morocco's northern coast is separated from mainland Spain by the Strait of Gibraltar and has long been a focal point for migrants attempting to reach Europe. But let's look at some live pictures now coming into us from the region. This is Spain first. This is Ceuta, where we can see lots of people on the streets, and there were many certainly previously watching when those people arrived. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Strait of Gibraltar, this is Founique in Morocco. You can already see a security presence there already. Monitoring this for us is our correspondent Sarah Rainsford, who's in Rome. Sarah, a pretty strong response there from the Italian government. Is there a real fear in Rome that this could see a surge of people heading in Italy's direction?
No.
Well, certainly that's the political statement that's come from the Prime Minister and from the Interior Minister here. Strong statements, as you say, talking about potentially suspending the Schengen agreement, the open border agreement within the EU. But of course, difficult to see how that's possible to implement for Italy, and Italy and Spain don't have a shared border. So I think this is a political statement more than anything. It's coming from a government which is facing an election next year and looking to appeal to voters further to the right than this government's current voters. So I think that's what's going on here in Italy. As to what's happening in Spain itself, I mean, those were extraordinary scenes yesterday. Many thousands of people making a very difficult, actually, crossing, having to scramble down a concrete embankment on the Moroccan side of the border and swim out into the sea beyond the jetty, around the jetty, with the very high border fence on it that separates Moroccan territory from Ceuta, which is the Spanish exclave they were trying to reach. And then scenes of utter jubilation for those who made it across the border as they touched down on the beaches there, some of them kissing the ground, chanting Viva España, smiling and doing victory signs to the cameras, because for them that was a huge achievement. And big questions, I think, from the Spanish authorities about how this has happened, how active the Moroccan authorities were in trying to seal the border, and why so many people all at once tried to make that crossing. As you said, it is a point where people do try to cross, migrants do try to make a crossing into EU territory as a rule, but this is an extraordinary number of people, the biggest number of migrants making that crossing since a previous incident back in 2021 when relations between Morocco and Spain were very complicated.
And Sarah, Spain says it's sending additional resources to the region. Has there been criticism that it shouldn't have got to this in the first place?
Yeah, certainly from the authorities in Ceuta, saying that they wanted a state of emergency to be called. They had been pointing, they said, to an increase in arrivals from Morocco in recent days, but that was numbering in the hundreds, and now what we're seeing is thousands of people coming across. There's been some speculation about why that could have happened, whether...
Breaking news.
So the former President Infantino's senior advisors, two of them have quit over the FIFA World Cup plans to sell it to a group of investors who comes after just 48 hours when 55 nations agreed, but the FIFA President needs a majority of 211 members. It comes 24 hours later that African nations, Asian countries also backed the idea. Well, today two of Infantino's top advisors have both quit over the FIFA World Cup plans. This 3-minute report from our sports correspondent Ollie Foster has the latest developments. Ollie. that was as far as Christmas and other fuss. There's more mounting pressure on the FIFA president Infantino after two of his senior advisors quit today over FIFA World Cup plans.
Breaking news to bring you now. In the storm surrounding FIFA's contentious plan to sell stakes in its competitions, including the World Cup, to private investors. Well, our sports correspondent Rob Harris is on the phone. Rob, what more do you know?
Sky News can reveal that one of Gianni Infantino's most trusted advisors, Carlos Cordero, has quit this morning in protest at the plans to sell off stakes in the World Cup. This is a bombshell. Infantino losing one of his closest allies, someone who's been so close to him for 5 years. And Mr. Cordero is not just a former leader of US soccer, he's also a former chairman of Goldman Sachs Bank, so he's very heavily involved in the banking world, and he is aghast at these plans by Mr. Infantino. This will put increasing pressure on how Infantino can potentially stay in power. This is part of the statement released exclusively by Carlos Cordero to Sky News announcing his resignation. He said, as a senior advisor to the FIFA president, a former banker and a lifelong football fan, I cannot stand by while FIFA considers selling a stake in the World Cup. Let me be clear, I had no involvement in this proposal and I oppose it unequivocally. It is a bad deal for FIFA member associations, a bad deal for football, and a bad deal for the long-term future of the game. Football has been central to my life, and after more than 35 years in banking, I understand both the value of this asset and the consequences of giving part of it away. That is why this proposal should be rejected. And that is a damning statement from someone so close to Gianni Infantino. He's been alongside him, meeting Donald Trump in the build-up to the World Cup, integral to the preparations of the tournament that's just been happening all around the world. Carlos Cordero has travelled with Infantino. The fact he's lost one of his closest advisors will be cutting to Gianni Infantino. As a reminder of these plans, $20 billion. They said this new venture would be worth to sell off the commercial rights, looking to sell 20% of it, of about $4 billion to private investors. Well, Carlos Cordero is saying that this is just not good value, and FIFA just overnight had tried to defend the process. Infantino's organisation saying there is a consultation still, even though these plans have been so well advanced that Sky News revealed yesterday they already had plans to receive the cash in October. Well, it is a very long statement we have received, and what Carlos Cordero also says is that this proposal has become a defining question for FIFA's future. After careful consideration, I can no longer continue my role, he said, and that's why he's resigned. And he says this is a message to the rest of the game that he hopes that the rest of the world of football speaks up now too. He says that decisions of this magnitude should be made in the interest of football and not those who stand to profit from it. And he's talking in this very detailed statement about the lack of economic attitude from this plan from Gianni Infantino, and talking a bit like many of the members, like UEFA have said, like the Asian and North American confederations, about the lack of detail. And what Carlos Cordero says about these plans are, most troubling of all is the absence of answers to fundamental questions. Why this deal? Why now? What oversight exists? Who benefits? Was there a competitive process? What governance will be in place? What investors ultimately gain? And at what cost to football? These questions remain largely unanswered, and yet member associations are being asked to make a decision of enormous consequence in barely 50 days or risk being left behind. That is not a responsible way to determine the future of the world game. And that is saying that Gianni Infantino is not acting responsibly at all. So this is a damning indictment on the leadership of Gianni Infantino, who often complains about the media critics. The FIFA statement overnight claiming that media reports misconstrued this World Cup sell-off. This is not a football association, it's not UEFA, who are often at loggerheads with FIFA. This, we have revealed, is Gianni Infantino's most senior advisor, Carlos Cordero, quitting in protest at Gianni Infantino's.
سيد جاني إنفانتينو رئيس الاتحاد البصري.
So it came off the post.
introduce the one that plays on the left, Drew, so there you go. Oh, one that can play striker.
As FIFA president. FIFA was filmed.
No, one that striker position. If Calvert Lewin can't play there, so it's not fit. What?
Gianni Infantino, the boss of FIFA, was filmed yesterday very much in his natural environment, a high-state occasion shaking the hand of a king. This time in Morocco, where he was perhaps trying to persuade His Majesty of the merits of his World Cup sell-off plan, while some of Mr. Infantino's closest colleagues are totally unconvinced. Carlos Cordero was instrumental in getting the Trump administration on board for the last World Cup. He's now resigned because he says the plan doesn't make financial sense. UEFA, which is threatening to boycott future World Cups over the deal, agrees.
FIFA already made huge multi-million pound revenues from the World Cup, which should go straight back into the game for the grassroots and the facilities and so on. FIFA sits on huge reserves, which should be spent in a not-for-profit on developing the game. So there's no need to sell off the game in order to develop it. You need to use your funds more skillfully and strategically.
This is how the footballing world is lining up around the Infantino plan, leading the charge against the home of the world's richest footballing countries, Europe. While the governing body in North and Central America says it has rejected the proposal too, as has the Asian Football Confederation, which is urging FIFA to undertake an urgent review of its governance and decision-making framework. In football's other historic stronghold of South America, the governing body has always been very supportive of Mr. Infantino. They've so far said nothing about his plan, while the confederations in Oceania and Africa have both said they'll discuss it in meetings next month. For some of the countries in these confederations, the money Infantino is offering would be transformative.
I think it's a real shame, because essentially those confederations that need the funding the most are almost being put in the middle and putting a proposal in front of 54 federations who absolutely need that investment, and using that as the leverage. Not great governance at all.
Not much more than 24 hours ago, it looked like Gianni Infantino might well put his proposals to a FIFA vote within weeks. That looks less likely now, and his future as FIFA president is now in question in a way it has never been before. Geraint Vincent, ITV News. Well, a former chairman of the FIFA Governance Committee, Miguel Maduro, is joining us from Lisbon now. Professor Maduro, just tell me first, I'm really interested to know what you make of Gianni Infantino's plan.
I think it's a plan that is now dead. The opposition of UEFA, I think, was the determinant factor, because even if UEFA didn't have the numbers in terms of football associations, it would have a huge economic impact on the commercial value of the project of Infantino. So the moment that UEFA decided to boycott FIFA competitions, unless Mr. Infantino will back down, I think killed the project. And what we see now is that the other confederations and football associations have realized that and are now aligning themselves with UEFA. But in itself, the project is a bad project for two reasons. On the one hand, because it will be one more step in the hyper-commercialization of football. One should realize that FIFA as its main task to be the custodian of football, and as such to protect all the interests in the ecosystem of football. But unfortunately, while having that role and being the regulator of sport, is at the same time the main commercial actor in that market. And being the main commercial actor as creating an incentive for profits to become the priority instead of the other interests that FIFA want to project. So this project of Infantino was one more step in that direction of the hyper-commercialization of football.
What are your memories of working with Mr. Infantino?
Well, they were not very good, because I lasted only 10 months, and we had some let's say, harsh conflicts. What I can say and what I learned during that brief period, me and my colleagues, and we have publicly spoken about it at that moment in time. I started in 2016 and I left in 2017, less than 10 months in being in office. What we realized is that FIFA was not prepared to have an independent body that will act genuinely independent by applying the rules equally to everyone, instead of taking into account the political and commercial interests of FIFA that often determine a selective application of the rules. And there were many instances of conflict. The most publicly known, and the example I can give because it's very well known, is that we blocked the election to the FIFA Council of the then Vice Prime Minister of Russia because of a simple rule that is in the FIFA Code of Ethics that says that any FIFA official needs to be neutral with respect to governmental organizations, and by definition, the minister of a government, being it Russia or any other country, is not neutral with respect to that government organization.
We need to acknowledge that change is hard, but if people fundamentally understand it's for the right reason, then you get the power of the organization with you.
Welcome to Reinvented with Accenture.
Side the last lap of the 5,000, and the two Australians, I think, are about to pounce. Keith grits her teeth. Davies gets to her shoulder, and Hull sits. Does she wait? She doesn't have to go. Keith, Davies and Hull. Davies almost at 250, and now Jess is almost going to go. So Rose now goes for it. She has to go for it, and Jess goes with her. It's stuff we dreamed of. This was what we were thinking about. This is what we thought might happen. It's the 10,000 metre champion against the silver medalist at the Olympics in the 1500. And Hull gets up alongside Davies. Have a look at this vision. Rose won't give it away. She's fighting hard. She's going to do the double. She's going to do what nobody has ever done. 5 and 10 of the Commonwealth Games. She is a true champion. Hull's run magnificently, and Scotland, yes, get the bronze. But it's all about the Aussies as Linden comes over the line. Unforgettable. Memorable. Just so special.
Super special, isn't it? Just the way that Jess Hull and Rose Davies took that race by the scruff of the neck. At the 200 metres to go, they were biding their time. They were waiting just patiently, weren't they? You could tell that they were both wanting to pounce. They waited, and then they unleashed. What a sight for Australian fans to see both Rose and Jess coming into the front straight together. And Rose, with her strength in the 10,000, she's recovered brilliantly, and she's got her second gold.
Australia, Rose Davies wins historic second Commonwealth Games gold medal in physics this evening. Congratulations, right? This is good to Australia, isn't it? The funeral director, who is in charge of 16 years in Hull, has been sentenced to 20 years behind bars. Let's just go down to the court and just got an for a quick view with Louisa. Louise, tell us more tonight. Okay, Louise outside Hull Crown Court. Now that is it. We are gonna go to beautiful North and join Anna. Anna, what's on the program tonight? As we have our 25-minute bulletin show on the program. More. We hear from family members after it was confirmed that Robert Boss, the funeral director in Hull, was sentenced to 20 years behind bars. Also, we'll talk about car parking. Is find a possibility for parents and elderly old people. And we can join Harvey, Bruce London tonight. Harvey was in the program. Tonight, more drought issues within the country. We'll be speaking to a chief weather reporter. Also, we'll have your other top stories today, including more on the FIFA World Cup issue. That's so BBC looking off with Anne and BBC London with Harvey. Fast up next. I will see you first with more news. Ben Brown will be with you from 12:40 p.m. tomorrow. And then we will have Jane Hill will be with you at 5:45 p.m. and at 10:05 Clive Myrie will be here. That's from us and for the team. Take care. Bye bye. See you later. Bye bye. Bye.